Before we uncover the devastating truth behind this family's betrayal, let me share a story that will redefine your understanding of loyalty. My name is Clarissa, a 34-year-old project manager living in Boston, and I recently made the ultimate sacrifice by donating my kidney to save my older sister. At the hospital room 3 days after the transplant surgery, I lay weak, breathing oxygen in a prolonged state of trance-like exhaustion. My 7-year-old daughter Lila was curled up asleep in the plastic chair beside my bed, as the only person who seemed genuinely concerned for my survival. During the quiet transition of the nursing shift, my sister Tamara crept into the room with a chilling silence that did not belong in a place of healing. She bypassed the monitors and reached directly for my life support equipment, while whispering that I should simply slip away so she could finally inherit my entire estate and our family home. The coldness in her voice acted like a shot of adrenaline through my veins, allowing me to reach up and grip her wrist with a strength I didn't know I still possessed. I forced my eyes open to stare directly into the soul of the woman I had just given a piece of my body to. Tamara froze in terror as the realization set in that her victim was wide awake and witnessing every second of her murderous intent. "Do you really think I cannot hear you? Are you seriously trying to extinguish my last spark of hope after everything I have sacrificed for you? What happens when the person you saved decides you are worth more dead than alive? Follow my journey as I strip away the masks of my greedy family and reclaim the life they tried to steal. Please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss how I turn the tables on these betrayers." 6 hours after the horrifying incident in the recovery room took place, I was forced to face a new theatrical performance staged by the very people who shared my DNA. My mind remained remarkably sharp despite the lingering haze of anesthesia, because the cold touch of Tamara's hand on my oxygen tube had effectively killed any remaining sense of familial trust. I immediately requested an urgent meeting with the Chief of Staff and my best friend Desmond, who also serves as my primary legal counsel in Boston. Desmond arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes, carrying the professional composure that I desperately needed to navigate this sudden betrayal. He quickly began coordinating with the hospital security department to ensure that the surveillance data from my recovery suite was sealed under the legal status of witness protection. The atmosphere in the hallway shifted instantly when my mother, whom I will refer to as Mom, finally appeared at the hospital entrance alongside my father. Instead of rushing to my bedside to check on my condition after a major surgery, Mom immediately began screaming at my 7-year-old daughter Lila because the poor child had accidentally dropped a sandwich on the linoleum floor. It was heartbreaking to watch Lila tremble under the harsh words of her grandmother while I lay helpless behind a glass partition. Mom didn't ask the doctors about my vitals or the success of the transplant, but seemed more concerned with the perceived mess in a public corridor. Tamara soon launched her calculated campaign of gaslighting by tearfully explaining to the medical staff that I was suffering from severe hallucinations caused by high doses of post-operative medication. She played the role of the grieving, grateful sister, perfectly wiping away fake tears while whispering to the head nurse that my accusations were merely a tragic side effect of the trauma. I remained silent and composed throughout her performance, keeping my smartphone hidden under the thin hospital blanket to record every word of their toxic interactions. Capturing their true nature on video was the only way I could provide concrete evidence for the legal battle that I knew was coming. Desmond stood firmly at the door, acting as a human barrier between my recovery space and the chaos that my family was trying to incite. He calmly informed the hospital administration that I was exercising my right to restrict visitors effective immediately due to the recent security breach. Tamara's face contorted with genuine rage the moment she realized her access to my room was being legally revoked by someone she couldn't manipulate. The nurse eventually escorted Mom and Tamara away from the private wing after they refused to lower their voices despite several warnings from the staff. The appearance of the formal no-contact order brought a momentary sense of peace to the sterile room as I watched the security guard take his position outside my door. I instructed the hospital staff that only Desmond and Lila were permitted to enter my room under any circumstances for the remainder of my stay. This decision sent a clear message to my parents that the days of them controlling my life and my assets were officially over. I could hear Dad shouting in the distance about how ungrateful I was being after they had raised me, but his words no longer carried the weight of guilt they once did. Lila climbed into the bed beside me, and for the first time since the surgery, I felt like the walls of the hospital were actually protecting me from the predators outside. We sat in silence as Desmond began drafting the preliminary documents to secure my property and financial accounts from any further unauthorized access by the Miller family. I thought I had narrowly escaped death and would be allowed to recover in peace, but everything was just beginning when I opened my banking application. My hands began to shake as I scrolled through a relentless stream of notifications showing unauthorized transactions at high-end shopping centers across Boston. While I was lying unconscious on an operating table losing a vital organ for my sister, someone was busy swiping my Visa card for thousands of dollars in luxury goods. The sheer audacity of these charges made my blood run cold because they were all time-stamped during the exact hours of my surgery. I realized then that my recovery was not going to be about physical healing, but about surviving a calculated financial execution by my own family. Lila sat at the edge of my hospital bed with tears streaming down her small face as she clutched an empty ceramic shard from her room. She sobbed while explaining how Tamara had taken her favorite piggy bank under the pretense of buying a special thank you gift for the surgeons. My daughter watched from the window as her aunt returned to the house carrying several designer shopping bags instead of anything intended for my medical team. It was the ultimate betrayal to steal from a 7-year-old child who had been saving her allowance for months just to make her mother feel better. The innocence in Lila's eyes had been replaced by a precocious understanding of the greed that lived under our roof. The situation escalated when my phone began vibrating with an incoming call from Mom that I knew would only bring more demands. She didn't bother with a greeting or a question about my pain levels before she began demanding an additional $10,000 for Tamara's recovery fund. My mother insisted that this amount was a necessary nurturing fee to compensate my sister for the emotional stress of the procedure. I listened in stunned silence as she described this payment as a non-negotiable requirement for my continued acceptance within the family circle. It became clear that they viewed my body and my bank account as a communal resource that they were entitled to drain at will. I immediately contacted my bank to issue a total freeze on every supplementary card and blocked all access to our shared family savings accounts. Desmond sat beside me with his laptop open, documenting every unauthorized transaction as we systematically stripped away my family's financial tether to my life. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction hearing the digital confirmation tones as each gateway to my hard-earned money was slammed shut for good. This was no longer about being a supportive daughter or a generous sister, because they had proven they were nothing more than predators in expensive clothing. I looked at Lila and promised her that I would replace every penny stolen from her, while ensuring those who took it would never have the chance again. Desmond then leaned in with a grave expression to inform me that my home security cameras had captured Mom handing my house keys to Tamara. My sister had apparently already begun moving her personal belongings into my primary residence, with the intention of claiming my master bedroom as her own. The realization that they were effectively trying to displace me while I was still tethered to a hospital monitor was the final straw for my patience. I grabbed the legal clipboard from Desmond and began signing the first series of formal documents to initiate the recovery of my property. We drafted a legal notice that explicitly prohibited any member of the Miller family from entering my home without my written consent. The weight of the pen felt like a weapon of liberation as I finalized the paperwork that would eventually lead to the eviction of my parents and sister. I instructed Desmond to file an immediate motion for a restraining order regarding my financial assets to prevent any further attempts at identity theft. My focus shifted entirely toward a strategic legal war where every signature served as a brick in the wall I was building for our protection. I was no longer the submissive provider they had spent years manipulating for their own comfort and luxury. As the sun set over the Boston skyline, I knew that my return home would be the beginning of their well-deserved nightmare. 1 week later, on the day I was officially discharged from the hospital to return home, the ringing of my phone from Dad sounded like a death knell. I had barely stepped through my front door when his voice exploded through the speaker with a level of rage that made the screen vibrate. He had been humiliated at the local supermarket because his card was declined at the checkout line after I issued the total freeze on all supplementary accounts. Dad screamed that I was an ungrateful child and used words so vile that I had to move the phone away from my ear to protect myself from his verbal assault. He claimed that my refusal to fund their lifestyle while I was recovering from a major surgery was the ultimate act of betrayal against the man who raised me. Mom quickly grabbed the phone from him to continue the onslaught with a chillingly calm tone that was far more manipulative than Dad's blunt anger. She began a lecture about the biological debt I allegedly owed them, stating that I would always be in their debt simply because they chose to give me life. According to her twisted logic, donating my kidney to Tamara was merely paying the interest on that lifelong debt, while the house was the principal payment I still owed. Mom insisted that my survival of the surgery was proof that I didn't need the money or the property as much as my sister did for her supposed long-term recovery. They had spent years grooming me to believe that my worth was tied to my utility as their financial provider, and now they were using that conditioning as a weapon. The conversation took an even darker turn when they attempted to blackmail me using the only thing they knew I truly cherished above all else. They demanded that I sign over the deed to my Boston home as a gift for Tamara, so she would have a stress-free environment to recover in for the next few years. If I refused to comply with this outrageous demand, Mom threatened that they would ensure I never saw Lila again by poisoning the child's mind against me. The sheer cruelty of using my daughter as a bargaining chip broke the last remaining thread of affection I felt for the people who shared my DNA. I realized that as long as I remained their benefactor, they would continue to treat me like a disposable resource rather than a human being with my own needs. I took a deep breath and delivered my cold response with a steady voice that signaled the end of our transactional relationship. I informed them that the weekly allowance of $750 they had been receiving from me was officially terminated forever, starting this very second. There was a sudden heavy silence on the other end of the line as the reality of their situation began to sink into their entitled minds. I told Mom that if they ever attempted to use Lila against me again, I would use every legal resource at my disposal to ensure they were removed from our lives permanently. They had mistaken my previous generosity for weakness, but the woman who walked out of that hospital was no longer interested in buying their approval. Desmond was already working in the background, reviewing some disturbing information he had uncovered regarding Tamara's initial insurance claims. Preliminary evidence suggested that she had been working with a corrupt insurance agent to inflate her medical necessity for the sole purpose of triggering a massive payout. This meant that my surgery might have been accelerated not for my sister's health, but for the financial gain of the very person who tried to kill me in my sleep. Every piece of information we gathered only served to harden my resolve to protect what was mine and punish those who sought to destroy me. Before the sun began to set over my neighborhood, I met with a professional security team I had hired to overhaul my property's safety. I watched as they replaced every smart lock and security camera at the house my parents were currently occupying under my name. By the time they finished, I held the only master code to the property, effectively turning their sanctuary into a cage that I controlled. As I looked at the new digital interface on my phone, I felt a grim sense of power returning to my hands for the first time in years. The battle for my life and my home was officially transitioning from a defensive struggle into a calculated offensive strike against my own blood. 2 days after the official notice to cut off financial support was delivered, my family chose to launch the most cowardly attack right at my place of work. I was in the middle of a high-stakes meeting at my construction project management office when the receptionist informed me that a medical emergency was unfolding in the lobby. I rushed downstairs only to find Mom and Tamara, who was sitting in a wheelchair acting like a frail invalid, attracting a large crowd of my colleagues and superiors. They immediately began screaming at the top of their lungs that I was a heartless daughter who had forced my sister to donate a kidney to me. Their narrative was a complete reversal of the truth, designed specifically to destroy my professional reputation and standing within the Boston architectural community. Tamara wailed about how I had abandoned her to rot in poverty after stealing her vital organ, while Mom shouted that I was an abuser who should be fired immediately. My co-workers stood in stunned silence as my family painted me as a monster who used money to manipulate everyone around me for personal gain. I watched their theatrical performance with a cold, detached expression because I had already prepared for this exact scenario with my legal team. The sheer malice in their eyes proved that they cared nothing for the truth as long as they could bring me down to their level of misery. Mom even attempted to grab my arm to pull me toward the crowd, claiming that I owed them my career just as much as I owed them my life. The chaotic atmosphere shifted abruptly when Desmond arrived through the glass doors accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers and a representative from the hospital's legal board. He carried a portable monitor and a folder containing the legally extracted surveillance footage that we had secured during my first day of recovery. My lawyer calmly requested the office manager to allow us to use the main presentation screen to clear my name once and for all. Tamara's face turned a sickly shade of gray the moment she saw the time-stamped video of herself reaching for my oxygen tube in the hospital room. The entire office watched in horror as the truth was displayed in high definition, revealing her murderous intent while I lay helpless and unconscious. The previous whispers of condemnation against me instantly transformed into a collective wave of disgust directed toward my mother and sister. My colleagues watched as the police officers stepped forward to serve Tamara with a formal notice regarding the investigation into her behavior at the hospital. Desmond then handed Mom a thick envelope containing a 30-day ultimatum to vacate my property before a court-ordered eviction would be carried out by the sheriff. He explained to the crowd that their claims were a desperate attempt to blackmail a successful woman who had finally decided to stop funding their toxic lifestyle. The security team I had hired arrived shortly after to escort my family out of the building while they were still shouting insults at my departing back. I waited until the lobby was quiet before I delivered the final blow to their crumbling plan by revealing the results of our private investigation. I looked directly at Tamara and informed her that I had already submitted a detailed report to the Massachusetts Division of Insurance regarding her suspicious claims. We had found evidence that she was attempting to exploit the surgery to claim a massive payout for permanent disability that she clearly did not possess. Her eyes widened with genuine fear because she realized that her greed had finally led her into a legal trap with no easy escape route. The insurance board was now launching a full audit of her medical history, which would likely uncover the web of lies she had been spinning for years. As they were led away, the silence that followed was not one of judgment against me, but of profound respect for the boundaries I had finally set. My manager walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder, apologizing for the scene my family had caused, while offering his full support for my recovery. I realized that the reputation I had built through years of hard work was stronger than the pathetic lies of people who only saw me as a source of revenue. I returned to my desk to finalize the eviction paperwork, knowing that the countdown for their departure from my life had officially begun. The legal wall I had built was now high enough to keep their poison out, while I focused on building a safe future for Lila and myself. Exactly 1 week since that night, the house I had allowed my parents to live in had transformed into a battlefield of ultimate greed. I monitored the situation through the hidden security cameras I had installed, watching in disbelief as Tamara descended into a state of pure, destructive madness. She began systematically smashing the expensive Italian marble countertops and slashing the designer leather furniture that I had worked so hard to afford. My sister was no longer pretending to be a frail patient, but was instead moving with a violent energy as she sought to punish me before the eviction took place. Every shattered vase and ruined painting was a desperate scream of a person who realized her era of effortless luxury was finally ending. The situation turned even more sinister when Dad called my personal line with a voice that sounded strained and dangerously unstable. He attempted to blackmail me by threatening to burn the storage crates containing my original architectural project drawings from my early career. Those blueprints and hand-drawn sketches represented thousands of hours of labor and were essential for my professional portfolio in the Boston market. Dad laughed as he described how easily the paper would ignite, hoping that the fear of losing my legacy would force me to cancel the legal proceedings. He didn't realize that his threats were being recorded in real time by the security software Desmond had configured for my protection. I informed him with a steady voice that any damage to those documents would simply result in additional criminal charges for arson and destruction of property. I decided that the only way to end their manipulation was to expose the financial reality of our relationship to the entire world. I took 5 years of detailed bank transaction history and published the redacted records across every social media platform where our family was active. The public was finally able to see the millions of dollars I had poured into their lifestyle, while they treated me like a bottomless ATM. I highlighted the luxury vacations, the designer clothing, and the constant bailouts for Tamara's failed business ventures that I had quietly funded. The revelation effectively stripped away the respectable family mask they had worn for decades, leaving them exposed as the parasites they truly were. The backlash from our extended relatives was immediate and surprisingly aggressive because they realized their indirect benefits were also vanishing. Aunts and cousins who had once praised my generosity now began attacking me online, accusing me of being a cold-hearted woman who forgot her roots. They were terrified that without my monthly subsidies to my parents, the financial burden of supporting Mom and Dad would eventually fall onto their own shoulders. I watched as people I had helped for years turned into vultures, proving that their loyalty was never based on love, but on the convenience of my wealth. Desmond spent the entire afternoon filing additional paperwork to sue Tamara for intentional property damage and identity theft regarding my personal information. Lila sat beside me on the sofa later that evening, holding a small stuffed animal while she watched the digital chaos unfold on my laptop screen. She looked up at me with wide, confused eyes and asked a question that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. She wondered why her grandmother would want me to suffer so much when I had always tried to take care of everyone. I pulled her close and struggled to find an answer that wouldn't destroy her remaining innocence while still being honest about the nature of greed. I explained that some people choose to love money more than they love people, and that our only job was to make sure we stayed safe from that darkness. Before the night ended, I received a notification that the local police had been dispatched to the property to document the ongoing vandalism. Tamara's screaming could be heard in the background of the officers' body cam footage as they forced her to step away from the kitchen island. The sounds of breaking glass and angry shouting echoed through the speakers, but I felt a strange sense of detachment from the carnage. I was no longer the victim trapped in their web, because every shattered item in that house was a small price to pay for my ultimate freedom. As I finalized the list of damaged assets for the insurance claim, I knew the final confrontation was only days away. On the final afternoon of the 30-day eviction deadline, Desmond brought a thick file that completely altered my perception of the entire medical ordeal. We sat in my quiet living room as he laid out evidence showing that Tamara had bribed a laboratory technician to manipulate her medical records. She had intentionally altered her creatinine levels to make a stable condition appear as a life-threatening emergency just to force my hand. This revelation meant that the frantic calls and the atmosphere of impending death were nothing more than a carefully orchestrated performance. My sister had gambled with my life and my health, not because she was dying, but because she was impatient to secure a massive financial windfall. Desmond explained that the primary motive behind this elaborate deception was to trigger an insurance clause for a permanent disability payout. Tamara knew that if she received a transplant under emergency circumstances, she could claim a staggering amount of compensation from her premium provider. She had been drowning in secret debts from her failed business ventures and saw my kidney as the key to her financial resurrection. The sheer coldness of her plan left me breathless because she was willing to let me undergo a major surgery under false pretenses. Every tear she shed in the hospital and every plea from my parents had been fueled by a lie that she carefully managed from the start. The most satisfying moment of the day arrived when Mom and Dad were confronted with the evidence of their favorite daughter's betrayal. They were visibly shaken when they realized that Tamara had never intended to share a single penny of the insurance money with them. She had planned to take the payout and disappear to another state, leaving our parents to deal with the aftermath of their ruined relationship with me. Mom began to wail in the hallway as the realization dawned on her that she had sacrificed her loyal daughter for a fraud. Dad stood in stunned silence, his face pale as he watched the police officers begin the formal eviction process at my property. The Boston police arrived in force to execute the court order, moving with a professional detachment that made the scene even more humiliating for my family. All of their designer clothing, the stolen furniture, and the remnants of their luxury lifestyle were carried out and piled onto the public sidewalk. Neighbors gathered at their windows to witness the downfall of the family that had acted so superior for so many years. Tamara tried to resist screaming about her rights while sitting in that wheelchair she no longer needed for any medical reason. The officers ignored her protests and continued to clear the house until every trace of their toxic presence was removed from my home. Just as Tamara reached the sidewalk, a detective stepped forward to place her under arrest for felony insurance fraud and the manipulation of medical records. She was informed that her actions had endangered a human life and that the state of Massachusetts was pursuing the highest possible charges. I watched from the distance as the handcuffs were tightened around her wrists, ending her reign of manipulation and theft. Mom and Dad tried to reach out to her as she was being led away, but she simply cursed at them for not protecting her from the consequences. It was a pathetic display of a family that had finally been consumed by the very greed they had nurtured for decades. As the police cars drove away, my parents were left standing among their scattered belongings on the curb, with nowhere left to turn. They looked toward my house with eyes full of desperate regret, finally realizing they had lost the only person who truly cared for them. I chose not to go outside to offer them comfort because some bridges are meant to stay burned for the sake of survival. Lila came to the window and watched the quiet street, asking if the scary people were finally gone for good. I pulled the curtains shut and told her that we were finally safe in a house that truly belonged to us. 3 months after the storm passed, Boston entered days of beautiful sunshine, and my life also began to turn to a completely new page. I moved into a modern apartment overlooking the harbor with Lila, a place that was smaller than my previous home, but filled with genuine peace and safety. There were no longer any hidden cameras or the constant dread of unauthorized guests lurking in the hallways with manipulative intentions. Every morning started with the sound of my daughter's laughter instead of the vibrating tension of a demanding phone call from people who only saw me as a bank account. I realized that the physical recovery from my surgery was secondary to the profound mental healing that occurred once I removed the predators from my inner circle. The legal consequences for those who sought to destroy me were swift and served as a stark reminder that actions have permanent prices in the real world. Tamara was currently facing a significant prison sentence after the Massachusetts Insurance Board finalized their investigation into her fraudulent medical claims. Her attempts to manipulate the healthcare system had backfired so spectacularly that she was now legally barred from accessing any future disability benefits. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad were forced to move into a cramped, dilapidated studio apartment on the outskirts of the city because their credit scores had completely collapsed. Without my weekly subsidies and with a history of court-ordered evictions, no reputable landlord in Boston would even consider their applications for a decent home. I decided to celebrate this newfound clarity by organizing a meaningful birthday party for Lila that we had been forced to postpone during the height of the crisis. We gathered at a local park with only a handful of sincere friends, and Desmond, who had become a pillar of support for our small family throughout the legal battle. There were no grand theatrical displays or expensive gifts designed to impress social media followers, just simple joy and honest conversations among people who truly cared. I watched Lila run through the grass and realized that I was finally teaching her the most important lesson about choosing the right people to trust. The atmosphere was light and free from the suffocating pressure of performing for a family that never appreciated the sacrifices I made for their comfort. My own recovery felt like a miracle, as the heavy psychological burden of being a lifelong provider for ungrateful people was finally lifted from my shoulders. My doctors were amazed at how quickly my remaining kidney adapted to its new workload once the chronic stress of emotional blackmail was eliminated from my daily routine. I returned to my architectural projects with a renewed passion, designing spaces that prioritized light and openness, reflecting the state of my own mind. I no longer felt the need to apologize for my success or hide my wealth to avoid triggering the bottomless greed of my relatives. The energy I once spent managing their constant emergencies was now directed toward building a legacy of stability and happiness for my daughter. The ultimate message I carried away from this harrowing experience was that shared DNA is never a valid excuse for exploitation or abuse. Family should be a sanctuary of mutual respect and support, rather than a strategic trap where the most successful member is drained until they have nothing left. True freedom is the ability to walk away from toxic bonds, no matter how long they have existed, to protect your own peace and future. As I stood on the balcony of our new home watching the sunset over the Atlantic, I knew that the storm had been necessary to clear the path for a life of genuine love. I was finally the master of my own destiny, standing tall in the light that waited at the end of a long and dark tunnel. The most critical takeaway from Clarissa's journey is the ability to recognize and confront emotional blackmail within the family structure. This form of manipulation often uses fear, obligation, and guilt to force individuals into complying with unreasonable demands that prioritize the manipulator's needs over the victim's health. You must understand that being a good daughter or a supportive sister does not require you to sacrifice your physical safety or financial stability for someone else's greed. Setting firm boundaries is not an act of betrayal, but a fundamental requirement for survival when dealing with toxic dynamics that masquerade as tradition. Authentic love does not keep a ledger of biological debts or use your children as bargaining chips to secure a better lifestyle. When the people who are supposed to protect you become the primary source of your pain, choosing yourself is the only path toward true freedom and recovery. Thank you for following the dramatic journey of Clarissa as she fought to reclaim her life and her home from the grip of a toxic family. This story serves as a reminder that your worth is not defined by how much you can give to others, but by the boundaries you set for yourself. If you found value in this narrative, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more realistic drama stories. What would you do if you were in Clarissa's position? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below.
Trước khi kết thúc câu chuyện đầy sóng gió ngày hôm nay, các bạn đừng vội rời đi, bởi những gì xảy ra với Clarissa không chỉ là một vở kịch drama mà còn là bài học đắt giá về ranh giới của lòng tốt. Câu chuyện của Clarissa là minh chứng rõ nhất cho việc lòng tốt nếu đặt sai chỗ sẽ trở thành cái bẫy tự hủy hoại chính mình. Trong một mối quan hệ độc hại, sự nhẫn nhịn không bao giờ mang lại sự tôn trọng, nó chỉ nuôi dưỡng thêm lòng tham và sự ích kỷ của đối phương. Việc Tamara lợi dụng máu mủ để thực hiện kế hoạch lừa đảo y tế hay sự thiên vị mù quáng của bậc làm cha mẹ chính là lời cảnh tỉnh về sự tống tiền cảm xúc mang tên gia đình. Chúng ta cần hiểu rằng hiếu thảo và hy sinh phải đi kèm với sự tỉnh táo. Cắt bỏ những phần hoại tử trong mối quan hệ không phải là bất hiếu mà là hành động dũng cảm để bảo vệ bản thân và tương lai của những đứa trẻ như Lila. Tự do thực sự chỉ đến khi bạn dám nói không với những đòi hỏi phi lý. Nếu đặt mình vào hoàn cảnh của Clarissa, bạn có đủ quyết đoán để đưa sự thật ra ánh sáng pháp lý, hay sẽ chọn cách im lặng để giữ hòa khí gia đình? Hãy để lại bình luận ở phía dưới nhé.